The wagon wheel lay splintered in the dust like a broken promise, and the woman kneeling beside it was crying so hard her shoulders shook with each sob, unaware that a lone rider was approaching from the east with the afternoon sun blazing behind him. James Randall had been riding through Texas for 3 weeks straight, moving from one town to another with no particular destination in mind, when he spotted the broken wagon on the trail leading toward Amarillo. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Copper, slowed as he pulled gently on the reins. The year was 1877, and this stretch of land between scattered settlements was unforgiving to travelers, especially those traveling alone. As he drew closer, he could make out the figure more clearly, a woman in a dusty blue traveling dress, her dark hair coming loose from its pins, kneeling in the dirt beside a wagon that listed heavily to one side. James dismounted quietly, not wanting to startle her, but the jingle of his spurs gave him away. The woman's head snapped up, and he found himself looking into the most striking green eyes he had ever seen, even if they were red-rimmed and filled with tears. She scrambled to her feet, brushing at her skirts with trembling hands. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I did not hear you approach." "No need to apologize, miss," James said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Looks like you have got yourself some trouble here." The woman let out a shaky laugh that was half sob. "That would be putting it mildly, sir. The wheel broke about an hour ago, and I have been trying to figure out what to do ever since." She gestured helplessly at the wagon. "I do not suppose you know anything about fixing wheels." James walked around the wagon, assessing the damage. The front left wheel had cracked right through 2 of its spokes, and the iron rim had come partially loose. It was bad, but not beyond repair if a man had the right tools and knowledge. He had fixed plenty of wheels in his 26 years, having grown up on a ranch where knowing how to mend anything that broke was as essential as knowing how to ride. "I can fix it," he said simply. "It will take some time, but I can do it." The relief that flooded the woman's face was immediate and profound. "Truly? Oh, thank God. I was beginning to think I would be stranded here until someone came along to rob me or worse." She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. "I am Catherine Kane. Most people call me Kate." "James Randall," he replied, extending his hand. When she placed her smaller hand in his, he noticed how cold her fingers were despite the warmth of the day. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Kane, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Please call me Kate," she insisted. "And I am so grateful I could cry all over again, though I think I have done enough of that for one day." James smiled at that, the first real smile he had managed in weeks. There was something about this woman that drew him in, something beyond her obvious beauty. Maybe it was the determined set of her jaw beneath the tear-stained cheeks, or the way she was clearly trying to gather her composure despite being frightened and alone on an empty road. "Well, Kate, let me get my tools and we will see about getting you back on your way," he said. "You heading to Amarillo?" She nodded. "I have family there. My aunt and uncle run a boarding house in town. I have been traveling from Missouri for nearly 2 months now." A shadow crossed her face. "My parents both passed from fever this past winter. There was nothing left for me back home, so I decided to make a fresh start." "I am sorry for your loss," James said quietly, and he meant it. He knew what it was like to lose family, having buried his own father just last year. His mother had followed 6 months later, leaving James and his younger brother to run the ranch, until his brother had gotten himself into debt with some unsavory characters. James had sold the ranch to pay those debts and sent his brother east to live with relatives, leaving himself adrift and alone. "Thank you," Kate said softly. "It has been difficult, but I am managing. Or at least I was until the wheel broke." James retrieved his saddlebags from Copper and pulled out the tools he always carried: a small hammer, some spare nails, a length of strong wire, and a few strips of leather. It was not a proper wheelwright's kit, but it would have to do. He set to work, first removing what was left of the broken spokes and then carefully examining the rim. "How long have you been on the road?" he asked as he worked, partly to keep her mind off her troubles and partly because he found himself genuinely curious about her. 8 weeks and 3 days, she replied, settling herself on a rock near the wagon. "I joined a wagon train in Missouri, but they were moving too slowly for my liking, and there was a man traveling with them who made me uncomfortable. He kept insisting that a woman alone needed a husband for protection, and he seemed to think he was the perfect candidate despite being old enough to be my father and having breath that could knock over a horse." James laughed at the image. "So you struck out on your own?" "I did," she said with a hint of pride in her voice. "Perhaps it was foolish, but I had my father's rifle and my mother's determination, and I thought that would be enough. It has been, mostly, except for this." She gestured at the broken wheel. "I do not know the first thing about wagon repair." "Nothing foolish about wanting to control your own destiny," James said, working a new spoke into place. He had whittled it from a piece of hardwood he kept in his supplies, and while it was not perfect, it would hold. "Though I will admit, this stretch of country can be dangerous for anyone traveling alone, man or woman." They fell into a comfortable conversation as he worked. Cate told him about her journey, about the small towns she had passed through, and the kindness of strangers she had encountered along the way. She spoke of her parents with obvious love and grief, describing how her father had been a schoolteacher and her mother a talented seamstress. She had learned reading and writing from her father and needlework from her mother, skills she hoped to put to use in Amarillo. James found himself sharing things he had not spoken of in months. He told her about the ranch, about the hard decision to sell it, about his brother's troubles and his own aimless wandering since then. There was something about Cate that made him want to open up, to share the burdens he had been carrying alone. "So you have no destination in mind?" she asked, watching him work with curious eyes. "You are just riding." "That is about the size of it," he admitted, fitting the second new spoke into place. "I keep thinking I will know where I am supposed to be when I get there, but so far nothing has felt right." "That must be lonely," she said softly. He looked up at her, struck by the understanding in her voice. "It is," he admitted, "but I reckon being around people you do not belong with can be lonelier still." "I think that is very true," she agreed. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky by the time James had the wheel repaired. It was not pretty, but it was solid. He had reinforced the cracked sections with wire and leather, replaced the broken spokes, and hammered the rim back into place. He tested it carefully, putting his full weight on it, and was satisfied when it held firm. "That should get you to Amarillo without any trouble," he said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "Though you will want to have a proper wheelwright look at it once you get there. This is temporary at best." Cate stood up and walked over to examine the wheel, her face glowing with relief and gratitude. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Randall. You have quite literally saved me. Please let me pay you for your time and expertise." "James," he corrected. "And I do not want your money, Cate. I was happy to help." She frowned slightly. "But you spent hours on this. Surely your time is worth something." "It is worth the pleasure of your company," he said, then felt his face heat up at how forward that sounded. "What I mean is, talking with you has been the most enjoyable afternoon I have had in a long while. Consider that payment enough." Cate smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "You are very kind, but I still feel like I should do something. Are you hungry?" "I have some provisions in the wagon, nothing fancy, but I could make us a meal before you ride on." James realized he was hungry. More than that, he realized he was not ready to part ways with this remarkable woman just yet. "That would be nice," he said. "Thank you." They made camp right there beside the trail. Cate pulled out supplies from her wagon, some dried beef, beans, hardtack, and a small pot for cooking. James gathered wood for a fire, and soon they had a simple but satisfying meal cooking over the flames. The evening air had cooled considerably, and Cate wrapped a shawl around her shoulders as they waited for the beans to heat through. "How far is Amarillo from here?" James asked, feeding another piece of wood to the fire. "About a day and a half, I think," Cate replied. "I was hoping to make it by tomorrow evening, but with the delay from the broken wheel, it will probably be closer to the day after." She looked at him hesitantly. "I do not suppose you are heading that direction." James had not been heading anywhere in particular, but suddenly, Amarillo seemed like exactly where he needed to go. "I could be," he said carefully, "if you would like some company on the road. I know you have been managing on your own, but like you said, this country can be dangerous. An extra gun along might give you some peace of mind." Hope flickered across her face. "I would like that very much, actually, but I do not want to take you out of your way if you had other plans." "My only plan was to keep riding until something interesting happened," he said honestly. "I would say meeting you qualifies." They shared the meal as darkness fell completely, the fire casting dancing shadows across their faces. The conversation flowed easily, moving from topic to topic without awkwardness. Cate had a quick wit and a wonderful laugh, and James found himself working to draw out both. She asked him about his life on the ranch, and he described the daily rhythms of cattle and horses, sunrise chores and sunset rides. She told him about growing up in a small Missouri town, about helping her father grade papers and her mother with her sewing clients. "I always thought I would stay there forever," she said quietly, staring into the fire. "I thought I would marry some local boy, have children, and grow old in the same house where I grew up. It is strange how life takes turns you never expect." "What happened to the local boy?" James asked, then immediately worried he had overstepped. "Sorry, that is none of my business." "No, it is all right," she assured him. "There was someone, actually, Thomas. We had an understanding, or so I thought, but when my parents got sick, he made himself scarce. Said he could not risk catching the fever, which I understood, but he never came back after they died either. Never even sent his condolences. I heard through a friend that he had started courting the banker's daughter a week after the funeral." "Then he was a fool," James said firmly. "Any man who would abandon you like that does not deserve you." Cate looked at him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "That is kind of you to say." "It is the truth," he insisted. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met, Cate Kane. Striking out on your own, traveling all this way alone, making a new life from nothing. That takes more courage than most people ever find in themselves." She ducked her head, but he could see the pleased flush on her cheeks. "I did not feel brave today when I was crying over that wheel. Being brave does not mean you never get scared or overwhelmed," James said. "It means you keep going anyway." They talked long into the night, neither one seeming eager to end the conversation and retreat to sleep. James learned that Cate was 22 years old, that her favorite color was the deep blue of the sky just before full dark, and that she had a terrible weakness for peppermint sticks. She learned that he was 26, that he had never been further east than Arkansas, and that he could play the harmonica passably well, though he had not touched one since his mother died. Finally, when the fire had burned down to glowing embers and Cate could not suppress her yawns any longer, they arranged their sleeping areas. Cate made up a bed in the wagon while James laid out his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. He lay awake for a long time after her breathing had evened out into sleep, staring up at the vast expanse of stars overhead and thinking about green eyes and a smile that made his chest feel tight. They broke camp at first light, sharing a simple breakfast of coffee and leftover beans. The repaired wheel held steady as they hitched up Kate's horse, a gentle gray gelding named Smoke, and prepared to continue toward Amarillo. James rode Copper alongside the wagon, close enough to talk, but giving the wagon plenty of room on the narrow trail. The morning passed pleasantly. The weather was fine, with a mild breeze keeping the worst of the heat at bay. They saw a few other travelers on the road, a family in a wagon heading the opposite direction, a pair of cowboys driving a small herd of cattle, a drummer on a mule loaded down with sample cases. Each time, James positioned himself protectively near Kate's wagon, his hand never far from his gun, though none of the encounters proved threatening. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal. Kate spread a blanket on the ground beneath a stand of cottonwood trees, and they sat together in the dappled shade. She had packed some cornbread and preserves, and James contributed some jerky from his own supplies. "Tell me about Amarillo," he said, biting into the cornbread. It was surprisingly good, moist and flavorful. "Have you been there before?" "Only once, when I was a child," Kate replied. "My aunt and uncle moved there about 15 years ago. They wrote to my mother regularly, and after she died, my aunt wrote to me and invited me to come live with them. She said they could use help with the boarding house and that I would always have a place there if I needed it." "That was good of them," James observed. "They are good people," Kate agreed. "I just hope I can be useful to them. I have never worked in a boarding house before, but I am willing to learn. I am good with people, and I can cook and clean and manage accounts. My father made sure I had a proper education." "They will be lucky to have you," James said with conviction. She gave him a searching look. "You do not even know me. We only met yesterday." "I know enough," he said. "I know you are smart and brave and capable. I know you do not give up when things get hard. Those qualities would make you an asset anywhere. You see a lot in a short time," she said softly. "Sometimes that is when you see clearest," he replied. They rode on through the afternoon, and the conversation continued to flow easily between them. James found himself telling Kate things he had never told anyone: his fears about the future, his regrets about selling the ranch, his worry that he was drifting through life without purpose. She listened without judgment, offering insights that showed a wisdom beyond her years. "I think sometimes we need to drift for a while," she said at one point. "Like a seed on the wind. We float along until we land in the right soil, and then we can put down roots and grow." "That is a nice way of looking at it," James said, struck by the poetry of her words. "My father used to say it," she admitted. "He said everyone has their season of wandering before they find their place to settle." Was he a wanderer before he became a teacher, in a way? He tried his hand at several things: farming, clerking in a store, even prospecting for gold for a brief time. None of it suited him until he discovered he had a gift for teaching. Then he never wanted to do anything else. "He sounds like a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew," Kate said, her voice thick with emotion. "I miss him every day." James reached over from his saddle and gently touched her arm. "I am sure he would be proud of you." She gave him a watery smile. "I hope so." They made camp that evening near a small creek, the water providing a pleasant sound as it bubbled over smooth stones. After tending to the horses and starting a fire, Kate announced her intention to wash some of the trail dust off. "There is a bend in the creek just past those trees," she said, pointing upstream. "I will be out of sight there. Would you mind terribly keeping watch? I will not be long." "Take your time," James assured her. "I will make sure no one disturbs you." He sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees, listening to the distant splash of water and trying not to think about Cate bathing in the creek. Instead, he focused on preparing their dinner, setting beans to cook and laying out the rest of their provisions. He was slicing some dried beef when he heard Copper whinny nervously. Instantly alert, James stood and scanned the surrounding area. The light was fading, making it hard to see into the shadows beyond the fire's glow. Then he caught movement, 3 figures on horseback emerging from the scrub brush to the south. His hand tightened on the rifle as the riders approached. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and trail-worn, their clothes dusty and their expressions hard. The one in the lead, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, raised a hand in greeting that did not seem friendly. "Evening," the man called out. "That is a nice fire you have got going there." "Evening," James replied evenly, not lowering his rifle. "I would offer you to share it, but I am afraid I do not have enough food for unexpected guests." The scarred man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Now that is not very hospitable. We have been riding hard all day and we could use some coffee and a warm meal." "Like I said, I do not have enough to share," James repeated. "There is a town about half a day's ride north. I am sure you can find a hot meal there." The second rider, a shorter man with mean little eyes, spoke up. "We saw 2 of you when we was scouting earlier. Where is your lady friend?" Every protective instinct James possessed roared to life. "That is none of your concern. I suggest you ride on before this gets unfriendly." The third man, who had been silent until now, suddenly grinned. "You planning to take on all 3 of us with that rifle?" "You might get 1, maybe 2, but not all 3. "Maybe not," James agreed, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "But I will definitely get you first." He aimed the rifle directly at the scarred leader. "And I am a very good shot. So you need to ask yourself if whatever you are thinking about doing is worth dying for." The tension hung thick in the air for a long moment. James could see the calculations happening behind the scarred man's eyes, weighing the potential reward against the very real risk. Finally, the leader shrugged and pulled his horse's reins to the side. "We were just being friendly," he said. "No need to get all riled up. Come on, boys. Let us find somewhere more welcoming." The 3 men rode off into the gathering darkness, but James did not lower his rifle until they had disappeared from sight completely. Even then, he remained standing, alert and watchful. A few minutes later, Cate emerged from the trees, her hair damp and her face clean, wrapped in a shawl. "I heard voices," she said, looking worried. "Was someone here?" 3 men looking for trouble, James told her. "But they moved on. Still, I think we should keep a watch tonight. I will take first shift and then wake you in a few hours." Cate's face had gone pale. "Do you think they will come back?" "I do not know," James said honestly. "But I would rather be cautious." They ate their dinner in subdued silence, both of them more aware of the vast darkness surrounding their small fire. James insisted that Cate sleep in the wagon with the rifle, while he would keep watch from his bedroll, positioned so he could see in all directions. She started to argue but seemed to realize he would not be swayed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting me, for being here." "I would not want to be anywhere else," he said, and meant it completely. The night passed without incident, though James barely slept during his entire watch. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, he felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. They broke camp quickly, both eager to put more distance between themselves and the previous night's unwelcome visitors. "How far to Amarillo now?" James asked as they got underway. "If we make good time, we should arrive by this evening," Cate replied. She had been quiet all morning, clearly still shaken by the encounter with the rough men. "They are gone, Cate," James said gently. You are safe. I know, she said. It is just that last night reminded me how vulnerable I am out here, how vulnerable I have been this whole journey. I was lucky nothing worse happened before you came along. You were doing fine on your own, he reminded her. Maybe, she allowed. But I am very glad I do not have to do it alone anymore. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. James felt his heart beat faster as he looked at her, taking in the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, the determined set of her jaw, the strength and vulnerability mixed in her green eyes. "Cate," he began, not sure what he was going to say but knowing he needed to say something. She turned to look at him fully, and the expression on her face stopped the words in his throat. She looked hopeful and frightened and something else he did not quite dare name. "Yes," she prompted softly. "I know we have only known each other for 2 days," he said, the words coming in a rush. "But I need you to know that meeting you has meant something to me. You have meant something to me. I have not felt this way about anyone in a long time. Maybe ever." Her breath caught. "James, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted quickly. "I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens when we get to Amarillo, whatever you decide about your life there, I want you to know that these past 2 days have been important to me." Cate brought the wagon to a stop. Smoke snorted in confusion at the sudden halt, but she did not seem to notice. Instead, she looked at James with such intensity that he felt it like a physical touch. "They have been important to me too," she said. "More than I know how to express. I feel like I have known you much longer than 2 days. Like somehow, you understand me in a way that people who have known me for years never did." James dismounted from Copper and walked to the wagon. Cate climbed down to meet him, and they stood facing each other in the middle of the dusty trail, the morning sun warm on their faces. "What does that mean for us?" he asked quietly. "I do not know," she admitted. "I am supposed to go live with my aunt and uncle, start a new life in Amarillo. But the thought of saying goodbye to you makes me feel like I am losing something precious before I even fully had it." "Then maybe you do not have to say goodbye," James suggested. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Maybe I could stay in Amarillo too, find work there. I am good with horses, good with my hands. Someone in town must need a hired hand or a ranch worker." "You would do that?" Cate asked, her eyes shining with hope. "You would stay?" "I have been drifting for months looking for a place that felt right," James said. "Maybe the place is not as important as the person. Maybe I was just looking for you." Cate made a small sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was in his arms. He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. When she pulled back slightly to look up at him, he saw his own feelings reflected in her face. "Is it crazy to feel this way so quickly?" she whispered. "If it is, then we are both crazy," he replied. "But I do not think it is crazy at all. I think sometimes you just know." "I think I do know," she said softly. "I think I knew yesterday when you fixed my wheel and did not ask for anything in return. I think I knew last night when you protected me without hesitation. I think I have been falling in love with you since the moment I looked up and saw you standing there." James felt like his chest might explode with the emotions coursing through him. "I love you, Cate Kane," he said, the words feeling both momentous and simple at the same time. "I know it is fast, and I know we still have a lot to learn about each other, but I love you." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks now, though they were clearly tears of joy. "I love you, James Randall." He kissed her then, gently at first and then with growing passion as she responded. Her arms came up around his neck and he pulled her closer, pouring all his feelings into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably keep moving," he said reluctantly. "Get to Amarillo before dark." Probably, she agreed, but neither of them moved for a long moment. Finally, they pulled apart and climbed back onto the wagon and copper respectively. But now James rode close enough that he could reach out and hold Kate's hand as she guided the wagon, and they traveled the rest of the way linked together, grinning like fools. Amarillo came into view as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. It was a decent-sized town, with a main street lined with businesses and several residential streets branching off. James could see a church steeple rising above the other buildings, and what looked like a small school at the far end of town. "That is it," Cate said, pointing to a large two-story building near the center of town. A sign hanging from the porch read Kane's boarding house in neat black letters. "That is where my aunt and uncle live." As they approached, the front door of the boarding house flew open and a woman rushed out, her face alight with joy. She was in her late 40s with graying brown hair and the same green eyes as Cate. "Catherine," the woman cried, rushing to the wagon even before it had fully stopped. "Oh, my dear girl, you made it. We have been watching for you every day." Cate jumped down from the wagon and was immediately enveloped in her aunt's embrace. Both women were crying and laughing at the same time, holding each other tightly. A man emerged from the boarding house next, tall and lean with a kind face and thinning hair. He joined the embrace, wrapping his arms around both women. James hung back, giving them their moment of reunion. But Cate soon pulled away and turned to him, her face glowing with happiness. "Aunt Margaret, Uncle Thomas, this is James Randall," she said, reaching out to draw him closer. "He saved me when my wagon wheel broke 2 days ago. He has been escorting me safely here." "Then we owe you a great debt, Mr. Randall," Margaret Kane said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you for taking care of our girl." "It was my pleasure, madam," James said, shaking her hand and then her husband's. "Your niece is remarkable. She had things well in hand even before I came along." "Even so, we are grateful," Thomas Kane said. His handshake was firm and his eyes were assessing, but not unkind. "Will you stay for dinner? We insist on showing our appreciation for your kindness." James glanced at Cate, who nodded eagerly. "I would be honored," he said. They helped bring Kate's belongings into the boarding house while Margaret fussed over her niece and asked 100 questions about her journey. The boarding house was warm and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and the smell of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. There were currently 4 other boarders. Margaret explained 2 traveling salesmen, a schoolteacher, and a widow who was waiting for her son to arrive from Kansas. Dinner was a lively affair, with Margaret serving a hearty beef stew and fresh bread. Cate sat next to James at the long dining table, and under cover of the tablecloth, she found his hand and squeezed it. He squeezed back, feeling a contentment he had not experienced in longer than he could remember. After dinner, while Margaret showed Cate to her room upstairs, Thomas invited James to sit on the front porch for a smoke. James did not smoke, but he accepted the invitation, sensing that the older man wanted to talk to him privately. "So," Thomas said, settling into a rocking chair and pulling out a pipe, "what are your intentions regarding my niece?" James appreciated the direct question. "I intend to court her if she will have me," he said honestly. "I know we have only just met, but I have strong feelings for Cate. I would like to see where those feelings lead." "Strong feelings after 2 days?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Yes, sir," James said firmly. "I know how it sounds, but it is the truth. I have never met anyone like your niece. She is brave and kind and smart, and when I am with her, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." Thomas studied him for a long moment, puffing on his pipe. "What is your situation, Mr. Randall? Do you have employment, means to support a wife?" "Not at present," James admitted. I sold my family ranch several months ago and have been traveling since. But I am a hard worker and I have experience with horses and cattle. I am good with repairs and general ranch work. I can find employment. What if I could offer you employment?" Thomas said, "We have been needing someone to help around here. The boarding house is doing well, but there is always maintenance needed, supplies to pick up, various odd jobs. Margaret and I are not getting any younger, and we could use someone reliable. The pay would not be much to start, but it would include room and board." James felt hope surge in his chest. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Thomas said. "I am a good judge of character, Mr. Randall, and I can see you are a decent man. More than that, I can see the way you look at my niece, and the way she looks at you. Margaret noticed it too. We both lost our own children years ago, a daughter who died in infancy and a son who passed from cholera when he was just 10. Catherine is like a daughter to us now, and we want to see her happy." "I want that too," James said earnestly, "more than anything." "Then we have an understanding," Thomas said, extending his hand. "You start tomorrow if you are willing." James shook his hand enthusiastically. "I am very willing. Thank you, sir. You will not regret this." "See that I do not," Thomas said, but there was warmth in his voice. When Cate came back downstairs, James pulled her aside to tell her the news. Her face lit up with such pure joy that he could not resist kissing her right there in the hallway. Propriety be damned. She kissed him back with enthusiasm, her arms wrapping around his neck. "I cannot believe this is happening," she whispered against his lips. "Yesterday I was alone and heartbroken over a stupid wagon wheel, and now I have you and a new home and everything feels like it is falling into place." "Believe it," he said, holding her close, "because I am not going anywhere, not unless you tell me to leave." "Never," she said fiercely. "I will never tell you to leave." The next weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. James proved himself invaluable around the boarding house, tackling repairs and improvements with enthusiasm. He fixed a leaky roof, built new shelves in the storage room, repaired all the squeaky doors, and renovated the small stable out back to better accommodate the boarders' horses. Thomas and Margaret were delighted with his work, and the boarders all appreciated the improvements. But the best part of each day was the time James got to spend with Cate. They would take walks through town in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. She showed him around Amarillo, introducing him to the various shopkeepers and town residents. He met the blacksmith, a burly man named Samuel who offered James occasional work shoeing horses. He met the pastor of the small church, a kindly elderly man who invited them both to Sunday services. He met the doctor, the sheriff, the owner of the general store, and dozens of others. Cate helped her aunt run the boarding house, proving to be a natural at managing the accounts and dealing with the guests. She could charm even the most difficult boarders, and her cooking skills improved rapidly under Margaret's tutelage. In the evenings, after the dinner dishes were washed, she and James would often sit on the front porch, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying each other's presence in comfortable silence. They courted properly, with Margaret as a watchful but approving chaperone. James brought Cate small gifts, wildflowers he picked on his morning walks, a hair ribbon he bought at the general store, a book of poetry the shopkeeper recommended. She made him a new shirt, the stitches so fine and even that he knew her mother had taught her well. She also baked his favorite pie apple with cinnamon whenever she could get the ingredients. On Sundays, they attended church together, sitting side by side in the pew with Margaret and Thomas. Afterward, they would have dinner at the boarding house, and then James would take Cate for a buggy ride into the countryside. These Sunday rides became precious to both of them, a chance to be alone together and talk without interruption. It was on one of these Sunday rides, about 2 months after their arrival in Amarillo, that James knew he could not wait any longer. He had already spoken to Thomas and Margaret the night before, asking for their blessing to propose to Cate. Both had given it gladly, with Margaret getting teary-eyed and Thomas clapping him on the back with approval. He drove the buggy to a spot overlooking a valley filled with wildflowers. The autumn sun warmed despite the slight chill in the air. It was late October 1877, and the landscape was painted in golds and browns, the cottonwood trees turning brilliant yellow. "This is beautiful," Cate said, stepping down from the buggy and walking to the edge of the overlook. "I have never been to this spot before." "I found it last week when I was helping Samuel track down some stray horses," James said, joining her. His heart was pounding and his hands felt sweaty despite the cool air. "I wanted to show it to you." She turned to smile at him, and the sight of her beautiful and happy and looking at him with such love nearly made him forget his carefully planned words. "Cate," he began, then had to clear his throat and start again. "Cate, the day I found you crying over that broken wagon wheel was the best day of my life." She laughed softly. "That seems like an odd thing to say." "Let me finish," he said, taking both her hands in his. "It was the best day of my life because it was the day I found you. I had been wandering, lost and alone, thinking I would never find a place where I belonged. But then there you were, and suddenly everything made sense. You made sense. This made sense." He gestured between them. Tears were already forming in her eyes. "James, I love you, Catherine Kane," he continued. "I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love how you laugh at my terrible jokes and how you hum when you are cooking and how you scrunch up your nose when you are concentrating on the accounts. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold ring. It had belonged to his mother, and his brother had sent it to him when James wrote to tell him about Cate. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you let me be your husband and your partner and the person who gets to wake up next to you every morning?" Cate was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, James, of course I will marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the love and passion he felt. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair as she pressed closer to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, she held up her hand to admire the ring. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It was my mother's," he told her. "My father gave it to her on their wedding day. They were married for 30 years until he died. She wore it every single day." "I will treasure it," Cate promised, "and I will treasure you." They were married 6 weeks later on a cold but clear December morning. Margaret had insisted on planning everything, and she threw herself into the preparations with the enthusiasm of a mother preparing for her daughter's wedding. She made Cate's dress herself, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with delicate lace trim. Thomas gave Cate away, walking her down the aisle of the small church with pride shining in his eyes. James stood at the altar in a new suit, his heart feeling like it might burst as he watched Cate walk toward him. She looked so beautiful it almost hurt to look at her, her dark hair swept up and adorned with small white flowers, her green eyes locked on his face. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows in front of the whole town, it seemed, as everyone they had met in Amarillo had turned out for the wedding. When the pastor finally pronounced them husband and wife and told James he could kiss his bride, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests was deafening. The reception was held at the boarding house, with tables set up in the main parlor and the dining room. Margaret had prepared enough food to feed an army, and there was music and dancing and laughter that lasted well into the night. James danced with his bride, holding her close and marveling that she was finally, truly his. "Happy," he whispered into her ear as they swayed to a slow song. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she whispered back. "I love you, husband." "I love you too, wife," he replied, the word tasting sweet on his tongue. Margaret and Thomas had given them a room on the third floor of the boarding house, away from the guest rooms. It was small but cozy, with a comfortable bed and a window that looked out over the main street. They had furnished it together over the past weeks, and it felt like home. That night, as man and wife for the first time, they explored each other with tenderness and passion. James was gentle with Cate, aware of her inexperience, and she responded to him with trust and growing confidence. They came together in a way that felt both spiritual and physical, sealing their commitment to each other with their bodies as they had with their words earlier that day. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Kate's head resting on James's chest as he ran his fingers through her hair. "Do you ever think about that broken wagon wheel?" she asked sleepily. "All the time," he admitted. "I thank God for that broken wheel every single day." "Me too," she said. "It brought me everything I did not even know I needed." "We will have a good life together," James promised. "I will work hard to make sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret this," Cate said firmly, rising up on one elbow to look down at him. "You are the best man I have ever known, James Randall. I am the luckiest woman in Texas." "I think I am the lucky one," he said, pulling her down for another kiss. The months that followed their wedding were filled with joy and hard work. James continued his work around the boarding house, but he also took on additional jobs around town. He worked with Samuel the blacksmith several days a week, and he also hired himself out to local ranchers who needed extra hands. The money was good, and he was building a reputation as a reliable, skilled worker. Cate blossomed in her role helping Margaret run the boarding house. She had a gift for making people feel welcome, and the boarding house's reputation grew. They were soon turning away potential boarders because all their rooms were full, which led to Thomas and James discussing the possibility of an expansion. In the spring of 1878, Cate announced she was pregnant. James was overwhelmed with joy at the news, picking her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. Margaret cried happy tears and immediately began knitting tiny clothes. Thomas ordered a cradle from the town carpenter. The pregnancy was not easy. Cate suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and James hovered over her anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and crackers and anything else that might help settle her stomach. As her belly grew, she developed pains in her back, and James would spend hours rubbing her shoulders and lower back, trying to ease her discomfort. But through it all, Cate maintained her cheerful spirit. She continued to help around the boarding house as much as she could, though Margaret and James both insisted she take it easy. She spent her evenings knitting tiny hats and socks, talking to James about what they would name the baby and what kind of parents they hoped to be. On a warm September evening in 1878, Cate went into labor. The midwife was summoned, and James paced the hallway outside their room, listening to his wife's cries of pain and feeling completely helpless. Margaret stayed with Cate, offering comfort and encouragement while Thomas tried to keep James calm. "She is strong," Thomas reminded him. "She will get through this." "She is in so much pain," James said, his voice anguished. "I cannot stand hearing her like that." "I know, son," Thomas said sympathetically. "But it will be over soon, and you will have a beautiful baby." It was nearly dawn when the baby finally arrived, a healthy, squalling boy with a thick shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. The midwife cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Cate's arms. When James was finally allowed into the room, the sight that greeted him brought tears to his eyes. Cate was propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding their son. She looked up at him with such love and pride that he felt his heart might burst. "Come meet your son," she said softly. James approached slowly, almost reverently, and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket, at the miniature fingers curled into fists, and felt a love unlike anything he had ever experienced. "He is perfect," James whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Cate. Thank you for this gift." "Thank you," she said, leaning against him, "for being the best husband and now the best father. I love you so much." They named him Jacob Thomas Randall, after James's father and Cate's uncle. Little Jacob was a good baby, though he had his fussy moments like any infant. James proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings and diaper changes without complaint. He would walk the floor with Jacob for hours when the baby was colicky, singing to him in a low, soothing voice. Watching James with their son made Cate fall even more deeply in love with her husband. He was gentle and patient, and the sight of his large, work-roughened hands cradling Jacob's tiny body never failed to make her heart swell with emotion. As Jacob grew from an infant into a toddler, Amarillo continued to grow as well. New businesses opened on Main Street, and the population increased steadily. The church built a new, larger building to accommodate its growing congregation. The school added another teacher. Thomas and James went ahead with their plans to expand the boarding house, adding 6 more rooms on a new 3rd floor. In the spring of 1881, Cate announced she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in December of that year, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Margaret Rose Randall, after Cate's aunt and James's mother. She had her mother's green eyes and a sunny disposition that had everyone who met her falling in love. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. James and Thomas expanded their business ventures, purchasing a small ranch just outside town where they raised horses. James had always had a gift with horses, and the business proved profitable. Cate helped Margaret run the boarding house, which had become one of the most respected establishments in Amarillo. Their children grew healthy and happy. Jacob proved to be as good with horses as his father, often accompanying James to the ranch from a young age. Little Maggie, as everyone called her, was her mother's daughter, charming and kind, with a gift for making people feel welcome. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. There were challenges, of course, lean years when drought affected the ranch, a terrible winter when half the town came down with influenza, the inevitable bumps and bruises that came with raising children. But through it all, James and Cate faced everything together, their love growing deeper with each passing year. In 1885, when Jacob was 7 and Maggie was 4, Cate gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Samuel and David. The boarding house was chaos for months after their arrival, but it was a joyful chaos. James hired additional help for the ranch so he could spend more time at home helping with the babies. Margaret, now in her 60s, proved she still had plenty of energy when it came to her beloved grandchildren. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1889, at the age of 72. His death hit the family hard, but they took comfort in knowing he had lived to see his beloved boarding house thriving and his adopted family happy and prosperous. James gave the eulogy at his funeral, talking about the man who had given him a chance when he was a drifter with nothing to his name, and who had become like a father to him. Margaret continued to run the boarding house with Cate's help, refusing to slow down despite her advancing years. She doted on her grandchildren and took great pride in the thriving business she and Thomas had built. The ranch prospered, and by the early 1890s, James had become one of the most respected horsemen in northern Texas. People came from as far as Oklahoma and New Mexico to buy horses from the Randall Ranch. Jacob, now a young man, worked alongside his father and showed every sign of being even better with horses than James was. Maggie grew into a beautiful young woman who helped her mother and grandmother run the boarding house. She had inherited Kate's gift for making people feel at ease, and the boarders all adored her. The twins, Samuel and David, were as different as two brothers could be. Samuel quiet and studious, David outgoing and mischievous, but both were good boys who worked hard and respected their parents. In 1895, on a cool autumn evening much like the one when James had proposed 18 years earlier, he and Kate stood on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over Amarillo. The children were all inside, and for a moment they had a rare bit of privacy. "Do you ever think about that day I found you crying over your broken wagon?" James asked, pulling Kate close against his side. Kate laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "You ask me that at least once a year, and my answer never changes. I think about it all the time. That broken wheel was the best thing that ever happened to me. I cannot imagine my life without you," James said seriously. "Without all of this, the children, the ranch, this town. You gave me all of it when you agreed to let me fix that wheel." "You gave me everything too," Kate said, looking up at him with eyes that still made his heart skip a beat even after nearly 2 decades together. "A home, a family, a love I never thought I would find. I was so lost that day, crying in the dirt, thinking my life was over. But it was really just beginning. Our life together was just beginning," James corrected, kissing her forehead, "and it just keeps getting better." Inside, they could hear their children laughing about something and Margaret calling everyone to dinner. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived together. "We should go in," Kate said reluctantly. "In a minute," James said, holding her a moment longer. "I just want to stand here with you and appreciate all we have built." Kate nestled closer to him, perfectly content. "I love you, James Randall, more today than yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "And I love you, Catherine Randall," he replied, "for all my days and beyond." They stood there together as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who had found each other by chance on a dusty Texas road and built a beautiful life together through choice and love and unwavering commitment. The broken wagon wheel that had brought them together was long gone, but the journey they had started that day continued, filled with love and family, and the deep satisfaction of a life shared. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1898, at the age of 79. She had lived to see all 4 of her great-grandchildren grow into fine young people, and to see the boarding house she and Thomas had founded become a thriving institution in Amarillo. Her funeral was attended by half the town, a testament to how beloved she had been. With Margaret's passing, James and Kate became the sole owners of the boarding house. They continued to run it with the same care and attention that Thomas and Margaret had shown, and with Maggie's help, it remained the finest establishment of its kind in Amarillo. Jacob married in 1899, taking as his bride a sweet-natured rancher's daughter named Elizabeth. They built a house on the ranch property and gave James and Kate their first grandchild, a boy named James Thomas, in 1900. James was 49 years old when he became a grandfather, and the experience filled him with wonder and joy. Maggie married in 1901, choosing a young lawyer who had come to Amarillo to set up practice. They moved into a house just down the street from the boarding house, and Maggie continued to help her mother with the business even after the birth of her own children. The twins both chose different paths. Samuel went east to attend university, studying to become a teacher like his great-grandfather. David stayed in Amarillo, working on the ranch with his father and older brother, though he had a wild streak that sometimes worried his parents. Through it all, James and Cate remained each other's touchstone. They worked together, raised their family together, and faced whatever challenges life threw at them as a team. Their love, which had sparked so quickly on that dusty road in 1877, had only deepened and strengthened over the years. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1902, their children and grandchildren threw them a party at the boarding house. The entire town turned out to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of the Amarillo community. There were speeches and toasts, and at one point, the sheriff, who had become a good friend over the years, asked James to share the story of how he and Cate had met. James stood up, pulling Cate to her feet beside him, and told the story he had told countless times before. But it never got old, this story of a broken wagon wheel and a crying woman and a drifter who stopped to help. He told it with humor and warmth, his hand never leaving Cate's, and when he finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. The moral of the story, James concluded, is that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to the best things that will ever happen to us. If Cate's wagon wheel had not broken, we never would have met. I would have ridden right past her on that trail, and both our lives would have been so much poorer for it. I think the real moral, Cate added softly, is that we should always be open to help when it is offered, and willing to take chances on people who seem worth the risk. James could have just fixed my wheel and ridden on, but he asked to join my journey instead. And I could have said no, but something in my heart told me to say yes. That yes changed everything. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and sorrows as years always do. David finally settled down in 1905, marrying a spirited young woman who was the only person who seemed able to match his energy. Samuel finished his education and returned to Amarillo to teach at the growing school system, marrying one of his fellow teachers in 1906. James and Cate watched their family grow and flourish with deep satisfaction. They had 10 grandchildren by 1910, with more on the way. The boarding house remained successful, though they had turned over more of the day-to-day operations to Maggie and her husband. The ranch was thriving under Jacob's management, with David working alongside his older brother. In 1912, James and Cate celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 60s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of laughter and hard work and life. But when they looked at each other, they both still saw the young people they had been on that dusty road in 1877. "You have any regrets?" Cate asked one evening as they sat together in rocking chairs on the boarding house porch, a ritual they had maintained for decades. James thought about it seriously, as he always did when she asked important questions. "Not a single one," he finally said. "Everything we have been through, even the hard parts, led us here. Led us to this life, this family. I would not change a thing." "Neither would I," Cate agreed. "Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if you had just ridden past me that day. Where would we both be now?" "Lost," James said simply. "I would still be drifting somewhere, looking for something I could not name. And you would be where? Working yourself to exhaustion at the boarding house, maybe married to some man who did not appreciate you, or maybe still alone." "But instead we found each other," Cate said, reaching for his hand. Even after all these years, his touch still sent warmth through her. "Instead we found each other," James agreed, "and built this beautiful life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the quiet street as evening fell over Amarillo. The town had grown considerably since they had first arrived. There were now electric lights in some buildings. Automobiles were becoming more common, and there was even talk of paving Main Street. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant. "Tell me again," Cate said softly, "about the day we met." James smiled. She asked this periodically, even though she had been there and remembered it as well as he did. But he knew why she asked. The story of their meeting had become sacred to both of them, a touchstone they returned to again and again. "I was riding through Texas with no destination in mind," he began, his voice falling into the familiar rhythms of a story told many times. "The sun was hot and I was lonely, and I was starting to think I would never find a place I belonged. And then I saw a wagon stopped on the road ahead, and a woman crying beside it. The most beautiful woman I had ever seen, though I did not know that yet because tears were streaming down her face and dirt streaked her cheeks. I was not crying that hard," Cate interjected, as she always did. "You were sobbing like your heart was breaking," James continued, grinning at her. "And I thought to myself, this woman needs help. So I stopped and I asked if I could assist with the broken wheel. And when you looked up at me with those green eyes, even full of tears, I felt something shift in my chest, like a door opening to a room I had not known existed." "I thought you were an angel," Cate said quietly, "or a mirage. I had been sitting there crying and praying for help, and then suddenly there you were, offering exactly what I needed. I fixed the wheel," James went on, "and we talked while I worked. And the more we talked, the more I knew I could not just ride away. So when the wheel was fixed, I did the bravest thing I had ever done. I asked if I could join your journey. And I said yes," Cate finished. "Even though I barely knew you, even though it was probably reckless and definitely improper, I said yes, because something in me recognized something in you, like we were two pieces that had been searching for each other. And here we are," James said, squeezing her hand. 35 years later, still on that same journey we started together. "Still traveling together," Cate agreed, "and I would not want any other companion." They continued to sit together as full darkness fell. Two people who had found their home in each other and built a legacy that would outlast them both. Around them, the boarding house was full of life, boarders coming and going, family members stopping by, the constant bustle of a thriving business and a full life. In 1915, James and Cate decided to officially retire from running the boarding house, turning it over completely to Maggie and her husband. James was 64 and Cate was 60, and while they were both still healthy and active, they wanted to spend their remaining years focusing on family rather than business. They kept their room in the boarding house, but they also built a small cottage on the ranch property near Jacob and Elizabeth's house. They split their time between the two places, enjoying their grandchildren and, increasingly, their great-grandchildren. James still worked with the horses when the mood struck him, though he left the heavy work to younger men. Cate kept herself busy with sewing and baking and doting on her ever-expanding family. They took long walks together nearly every day, holding hands like young sweethearts, and they still sat on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Their love story had become legendary in Amarillo. Young couples would ask them for advice, and James and Cate always told them the same thing. Find someone who makes you want to be better, someone you can talk to about anything, someone you respect as much as you love. Build your relationship on friendship as well as passion. Be patient with each other. Never go to bed angry. Always remember why you fell in love in the first place. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1917, the whole family gathered for a celebration at the ranch. There were over 30 people present: children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, plus close friends who had become family over the years. It was a beautiful day filled with laughter and food and love. As the sun began to set, Jacob called for everyone's attention. "I want to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To my parents, who have shown all of us what true love looks like. You have built not just a successful business and a thriving ranch, but a family filled with love and respect. You have given us the greatest gift, the example of a marriage built on partnership and devotion. We love you both more than words can say." To James and Cate, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. James stood, pulling Cate up beside him. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I met this woman 40 years ago, I was alone in the world with nothing to my name but a horse and some tools. She gave me everything: love, family, purpose, a home. Every good thing in my life started the day I fixed a broken wagon wheel for a crying woman on a dusty road. And you gave me everything too," Cate added, her eyes shining with tears. "You showed me that love does not have to come slowly or carefully. Sometimes it hits you like lightning, and all you can do is hold on and trust that it is real. Our love has been real from that first day to this one, and it will be real until our last days." They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of their family, still deeply and truly in love after 40 years of marriage. The years that followed were gentle ones. James and Cate slowed down physically. James developed arthritis in his hands, and Cate's eyesight began to fail, but their spirits remained strong. They continued their daily walks, though shorter now, and their evening porch sits became a beloved ritual that the whole family respected and protected. In 1920, they celebrated their 43rd anniversary quietly, just the two of them, at the cottage on the ranch. They woke early and watched the sunrise together, then spent the day reminiscing about their long life together. They looked through old photographs, read letters they had written to each other over the years, and talked about all the memories they had made. "I have been so blessed," Cate said as they prepared for bed that night. "To have you, to have our children and grandchildren, to have built such a beautiful life together. I could not have asked for more." "Neither could I," James agreed, holding her close in the bed they had shared for more than 4 decades. "You have been the great love of my life, Catherine Kane Randall, my partner in everything, my home. And you have been mine," she whispered, kissing him softly, "always and forever." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done countless times before. Two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. James passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, in the spring of 1922, at the age of 71. He had spent the previous day working with a young horse at the ranch, doing what he loved, surrounded by family. That evening, he and Cate had sat on their cottage porch, watching the sunset and holding hands. He had told her he loved her, kissed her goodnight, and simply not woken up the next morning. The grief nearly broke Cate, but she found strength in her family and in the knowledge that she and James had made the most of every day they had been given. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the years. Jacob gave a eulogy that had everyone crying, talking about his father's kindness, his integrity, his devotion to family, and his unwavering love for his wife. Cate lived for 3 more years after James's death, surrounded by her loving family but always missing the other half of her heart. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, sharing stories about James and the life they had built together. She made sure they all knew the story of the broken wagon wheel and the cowboy who had stopped to help, and how that one act of kindness had created a legacy that would last for generations. On a warm September evening in 1925, Cate passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 69. Her family took comfort in the belief that she and James were together again, continuing their journey in whatever came next. They were buried side by side in the Amarillo cemetery, under a large oak tree. Their shared headstone was simple but meaningful. James Randall, 1851–1922, and Catherine Kane Randall, 1855–1925. Two souls, one journey, eternal love. And beneath that, at Maggie's insistence, they had added, "It started with a broken wheel and a cowboy who stopped to help." The boarding house continued to operate for many more years, run by Maggie's children and then her grandchildren, always maintaining the standards of excellence and welcome that Thomas and Margaret had established, and James and Cate had continued. The ranch thrived for generations, with Jacob's descendants continuing James's tradition of raising the finest horses in Texas. But more than the businesses or the property or the material legacy, what James and Cate left behind was a family built on love and respect, a family that knew the value of kindness and partnership and commitment. Their descendants told and retold the story of how their love began, of a crying woman and a helpful cowboy and a broken wagon wheel that became a bridge to a beautiful life together. And on summer evenings in Amarillo, if you walked past the old boarding house or drove out to the ranch, you might feel a sense of warmth and peace, as if the love that James and Cate had shared still lingered in those places, blessing all who came after them with the example of what true love could build when given the chance to grow and flourish over a lifetime together.